Professor Norman Finkelstein as well, and he is, one of my childhood heroes as well. If there were not people like Professor Norman Finkelstein, I don't think we would have ever been successful in officiating this word of genocide on Israel. Capitalist state, I like to use the word oligarchy capitalist state. And this ideology is transferred into the academic institutions.
U.S. academia has a huge influence on academia around the world. Have the most resources, the money put in. There's like 2 or 3 universities in the U.S. that get the chunk of the national security. I mean, this giant funds come out of Washington.
There is a culture of worshipping money and worshipping chairs among the academia circle as well. Anti-imperialist academics I know have been fired or quit.
I think the sacred cow really here in the West is talking about NATO. People look at you like you're an alien, and why would you want to study something like that? I think you have to look at the world in its totality. When you asked the question earlier about academia, and I don't really think, academia can be important launching point for different struggles, and we see pro-Palestinian activists in universities in Europe and North America, getting arrested in mass, and of course these are all very important in mobilizing and popular education and putting pressure, but at the same time I don't think you can really change like the political scene of a country and rearrange things just through sort of like academia and those sort of circles. You need grassroots political momentum, and training and education. So it has to be, I think academia has its limitations,
Yeah, I think this is a very big question, because I've also gotten a bit privileged of probably in future talking to Professor Norman Finkelstein as well, and he is one of my childhood heroes as well, because he is one of those academics. He's one of those academics who have actually shown us that if you remain true to academia for a longer duration, and you can change the narrative in the end. If there were not people like Professor Norman Finkelstein, I don't think we would have ever been successful in officiating this word of genocide on Israel, right? Because of the works of these people, Operation Protective Edge. These people continuously wrote about these things. The problem I see is, again, you wrote and you mentioned this, that the USA is a very advanced capitalist state. I like to use the word oligarchy capitalist state. And this ideology is transferred into the academic institutions, not just America, even in our country, in Pakistan as well, in all the countries. And I myself, just like you shouted George W. Bush, I also do that. So we share this.
पाकिस्तान की जितनी भी यूनिवर्सिटीज़ हैं, इधर हम अपनी एकेडमिक और इखलाकी आइडेंटिटी को आहिस्ता आहिस्ता खो रहे हैं। उसकी मेन वजूहात ये हैं कि एक तो हमारी जितनी टॉप मैनेजमेंट है यूनिवर्सिटियों के अंदर, उन सब के ब्यूरोक्रेट्स और सियासतदानों के साथ ताल्लुकात हैं, और उन सियासतदानों की माइंडसेट इतनी एकेडमिक नहीं है, इतनी ना उनकी एकेडमिक माइंडसेट होती है और ना उनकी कोई इखलाकी माइंडसेट है। वो हमें सारा कल्चर पता है किस तरह का है। वो जो है वो ट्रांसफ़र हो रही है आहिस्ता आहिस्ता हमारे तलीमी इदारों की, जिसकी वजह से हमारी तलीमी इदारों में इखलाकी आइडेंटिटी और एकेडमिक आइडेंटिटी वक्त ख़त्म हो रही है, रिसर्च का कल्चर ख़त्म हो रहा है, और ये सारी चीज़ों में कमी आ रही है। गंदी सियासतें और तकब्बुर और एरोगेंस एक दूसरे पे दिखाना, पावर पॉलिटिक्स एक दूसरे पे दिखाना, ये सारी चीज़ें वक्त के साथ साथ बढ़ रही हैं। इन चीज़ों को आहिस्ता आहिस्ता स्टेबलाइज़ करने के लिए हमारा बड़ा ज़रूरी काम है कि जो आने वाली एकेडमिक यूथ है उसके लिए आवाज़ बुलंद करें और इसको स्टेबलाइज़ कर सकें इंस्टीट्यूशन। अगर आगे एकेडमिक यूथ इसके लिए आवाज़ नहीं बुलंद करेगी तो ये हमेशा के लिए स्टैगनेंट रह जाएगा। हमारा जितना टैलेंट है पाकिस्तान में स्टैगनेंट रह जाएगा। हमारे यहाँ अल्लामा इकबाल जैसे लोग भी अगर होंगे तो वो आगे नहीं आ सकेंगे कभी। क्यों? क्योंकि जितने भी टैलेंटेड लोग हैं उनको एग्जॉस्ट किया जाता है सिस्टम के थ्रू। तो हमारे ज़्यादातर जितने भी यूनिवर्सिटी में वाइस चांसलर्स हैं, ये ब्यूरोक्रेट्स और सियासतदानों के साथ मिल के, ब्यूरोक्रेट्स और इधर UHS में भी ब्यूरोक्रेट्स और सियासतदानों के साथ मिल के एम्प्लॉयज़ के ऊपर पावर अब्यूज़, बुलिंग और हरासमेंट के टैक्टिक्स अप्लाई करते हैं, जिसकी वजह से ना स्टूडेंट्स और ना एम्प्लॉयज़ के इश्यूज़ रिजॉल्व हो पाते हैं और वो एक एग्जॉस्ट वाले सिचुएशन में चले जाते हैं, एक स्टैगनेंट सिचुएशन में रुक जाते हैं और ग्रोथ नहीं ले पाते अपनी करियर्स में।
I also, carrying the status quo.
U.S. academia, just sorry to cut you off, U.S. academia has a huge influence on academia around the world because, how you get raises and hired, it's all depends on where you went to school and where you get your grants and what journals you get published in. So there's this whole sort of like academic hierarchy, right? And it's and the Western, the sort of Anglo-American, the universities in these countries are always ranked at the top. They have the most resources, the money put in. There's like 2 or 3 universities in the US that get the chunk of the national security. I mean, this giant funds come out of Washington, do all sorts of studies geared towards corporate plundering around the world, and all sorts of military high-tech research and things that are tied into big capital. But yeah, it influences academics around the world. Like, you have American liberal diversity trainers going and like working in other countries, and you see a sort of you see alteration or movement in different academic circles stepping in line with what's popular in the United States. It's almost like sort of cultural hegemony, and how different cultural traits spread around the world, or things that come out of Hollywood, that influences entertainment in other countries too. So
Yeah,
I
would
don't
say,
want to just
yeah,
go ahead.
yeah, I would say that again, when we mention academia, ideology is very important, right? And
Yeah.
the moral legitimacy, we say the America and major parts of the world, because they have become so much capitalist, their mindset have become so much oligarchic capitalist, they have lost the moral legitimacy in the world, right? This is what we argue. This is what we as academics can offer to the world, that to revive, to restore the moral legitimacy in this world. So we say, and I was actually reading that, I asked you this question, that we see a decline in power of academics, particularly in influencing the ruling elite in decision making. We've seen how ruling elite deals with academics, like the recent ousting of presidents in Harvard, Penn, MIT. How do we reclaim our worth? And you gave a very good reply that many students have protested and mobilized, including some staff. Most of the strongly anti-imperialist academics I know have been fired or quit, or they have found other careers. The few that remain only can survive as non-tenured, temporary adjunct professors. I myself quit academia. Then you mentioned about this, and you mentioned about a capitalist state. The thing is, there is a culture, and I myself, challenge this in my country. There is a culture of worshipping money and worshipping chairs among the academia circle as well, because they worship, their higher politicians. They think they control all the budgets. When those people in academia think that the politicians control all the budget, then money is everything for them. Yeah, chairs are everything for them. Designations.
And there's I agree with you, and there are certain sacred cows that can't be touched, right? Like, I know, for example, in India, like, you can't talk about Kashmir. There's a lot of things you can talk about, but you can never talk, like, if you talk about Kashmir,
we'll talk about it. We'll talk about
these things, right? Like in the US and in a lot of places, you can talk about things like racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia. You can talk, or in Western Europe, these sorts of things can be studied. Although they push against, different heterodox radical approaches. I mean, there are scholars, Foucauldians or Marxists or different people that have a radical understanding of different things. But I think the sacred cow really here in the West is talking about NATO or a US war. That's just my experience, at least, that these sorts of things, like, for example, if you wanted to get money to study the civilian impact of the NATO bombing campaign on Libya, or if you wanted to look at the impact of spent uranium shells that were shot in Iraq by the US military, or the impact of, European Union sanctions on Venezuela, on its cutting off from financial interactions, and its impact on, like, medical, facilities, or being blocked from buying different technologies. If you try to look at things like that, there's no interest in it. And if you do try to do something like it, people look at you like you're an alien, and why would you want to study something like that? And so this isn't to say that we shouldn't look at things like caste or race or homophobia or these sorts of things, but I think you have to look at the world in its totality instead of dividing it up into all these little separate identifiers that you just spend your life studying that one thing. I think you have to look at the world in its totality, and you also have to be open to reassessing what you think, because things can change. Do you know what I mean? You have to be, and that's hard to do, because we can kind of fossilize or get stuck in our ways, in our thinking, and kind of fight against sectarianism, because we can really break up into all these little groups, and then not be open to
collaboration
working
and
with
coordination
outside. Like in the US, for example, last year there was a rally called Rage Against the War Machine, where for the first time in my lifetime, you had groups on the right, the left, the center, libertarian groups, socialist, communist groups, but also more conservative groups like libertarian, Republicans. But they were all groups that are against war, and they all and some populist type, yeah, and they all came together and had a rally, and it was like it was really attacked in the sort of mainstream media, some of the smaller Trotskyist groups and kind of academic sectarian groups really attacked it. But I thought, anything that can get people talking and trying to stop what could be World War III and extinction of our species, how could you oppose that? So that's my general thinking on that.
Yeah, and I really like one of your comments on this when you mentioned that popular movements need to be based in communities with people from different generations and backgrounds. Those things become a bigger narrative, because not just in institutions. And I also like to spread this message that we don't only need to win these mini wars in the institutional level, but also in our homes as well, because our houses is where all our ideologies develop, and our all our backgrounds and all these kind of things develop. So this was, I think, one of your best points for me, that popular movements need to be based on your homes as well, with different backgrounds and generations as well, right?
Yeah.